bizarre stories from the subscribers.
My name is Valdemar. I'm 57 years old and I'm a truck driver.
That day I was making a meat delivery in a state in the Northeast. It was one of the strangest experiences I've ever had in my life. The trip was going smoothly until, in the middle of nowhere, one of my truck's tires went flat. It was the front right one. It was a deserted road and there was no cell phone signal to call for a tow truck or any help. I was alone there in that god-forsaken place, surrounded by a vast expanse of grass and dry trees. The sun was already setting and I knew I had to change the tire as quickly as possible. While I was there, with my hands dirty with grease and my eyes fixed on the task, something caught my attention. That was strange. Everything was properly closed. How did this open? Could someone have opened it and took the meat while I was changing the tire? That's when I noticed something even more frightening. There were tracks on the ground, like footprints leading toward a shabby shack out there in the middle of the woods. I decided to follow the tracks, then from the footprints to the shack to see if they really took my cargo. As I got closer, I felt a chill down my spine, like something wasn't right. When I got there, the sight that unfolded before me was terrifying. There were children there, all with hungry eyes and skeletal faces, eating the raw meat that the transporter carried like it was butter. Their eyes didn't leave me when I entered the shack. But there was something deeply wrong with those children. They weren't real children. They were transparent like ghosts, and their hands went right through the meat they were devouring. I instinctively stepped back, feeling a chill run through my whole body. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. I knew that something terrible had happened there. Those children were ghosts, victims of a terrible death from lack of food. I couldn't offer them food because they were spirits, but something inside me desperately wanted to help somehow. With a heavy heart, I left the shack and continued on my journey. I couldn't get the image of those hungry children out of my mind. A strange experience messed with my head, man. And I always remember that when I'm on the road. I wonder what could have led those kids to such a sad fate. Did they lose their parents and as a result die of hunger in that place? I guess I helped in some way, right? They ate part of the cargo. I hope they find the light. Hello, Leo. My name is Jorge, and today I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me recently. My family and I live on a farm 15 kilometers from the city. There was one night when it was around 8 or 9 o'clock, more or less. And my father had to go to the bank to withdraw some money. Since it was late, I didn't want him to go alone, so I went with him. While we were riding the motorcycle along the dirt road until we reached the asphalt, I was always afraid that some animal would come out of the bushes and come after us. So I was always on high alert. When we got to the road, we sped up a bit more because it was already late, as I had mentioned. When we got to the bank, my father went inside and I stayed outside waiting and watching the motorcycle, right? It was really cold that night, man, and a few minutes went by while he was inside. At that moment, I realized there was a cemetery across the street. At one point, an old man walked by inside among the tombstones. He was walking in circles, back and forth, kind of aimlessly. He had a big beard, an old black hat, a kind of grey worn-out shirt and black pants too. He walked by and looked at me. I got goosebumps at that moment. I thought it was some employee, Taria working there at that hour. So my father arrived and I asked him if there was any gravedigger inside doing some work. And he said that at that hour, usually no one else worked there, that it closed at 5 p.m. The next day, when my father went back there to take care of other things, by chance, he passed by the cemetery again. It was around 7 p.m., and out of curiosity, he told me that he looked inside. That's when he saw that man walking through the cemetery. As I had mentioned at home, he told me that it was a soul, because he saw it floating and its feet weren't touching the ground. He said that a soul can get stuck in a place for several reasons. Unresolved matters, traumatic death, magic or curse, lack of proper rituals, revenge or resentment, pacts with supernatural entities. Who knows what happened to that man? Well, if he's there, I hope he never leaves that place and comes to terrorize anyone, right? Hello Leo, my name is Radira. I'm a big fan of yours. This story happened when I was 7 years old. Now I'm 12. One day I saw in the newspaper that the playground in our city would be renovated. We were very happy because it was very broken, all worn out. There were some toys that were completely rusty. I remember that the slide had some pipes all in bad shape and it was hard to even climb on it. Some toys were unusable. The place underwent renovation for a month. And after the playground was ready, we went there to check it out, didn't we? I remember that on that day, my parents took me there after school. It was around 5:30 in the afternoon, and I was excited to use all the toys. Thank God they fixed that place. It was embarrassing before, and when I got there, I played a lot until it got dark. I ended up meeting a girl who seemed to be my age. She introduced herself as Clara and said she was there with her parents. But there were no adults there except for my parents. I ignored the fact and we kept playing, and I noticed that I always saw her whenever I went to that playground. It seemed like she was always there, but never with any adults around. Could it be that she lives nearby and her parents let her be alone? Sometimes they're watching from a distance, right? But I don't see anyone. Until one day, when I got home, I mentioned to my parents about the girl named Clara. However, they said they saw me very happy, playing as if I was talking to a friend, but there was no one there. They thought it was some imaginary friend of mine that I was imagining things. Or maybe that girl was actually a ghost who died there in some accident on those old, rusty playground toys. Years later, I found out that a girl had died there. And that caused a big commotion at the time, forcing the city hall to renovate the playground, which hadn't had maintenance in decades and was dangerous for the children. Nowadays, I don't see her anymore. I think her spirit has gone to rest. Bizarre stories from the subscribers? Hi, I really like your channel and I'd like to share a story that happened to me a few months ago. My name is Yasmin, and recently my great-grandmother on my father's side passed away. I went to the funeral, which took place in a very beautiful cemetery and with the presence of many people. Although I have already experienced some supernatural things, what happened that day was truly sinister. Everyone was attending the funeral in a very traditional way, and I at that moment was just silent, respecting the sadness that surrounded the occasion. It was at that moment that I started to hear static like from a radio. My father's a radio amateur. So, at first, I assumed the noise was coming from him or from someone responsible for taking care of the cemetery, who might have been there, right? Using some kind of radio. I thought everyone around me was hearing the noise too, so I didn't think much of it. However, as the seconds passed, the noise started to get louder, becoming clearer and more disturbing. I looked around to see if people were also being affected by this strange sound, but everyone seemed completely indifferent, as if they weren't hearing anything at all. So I decided to turn my attention back to the funeral, trying to ignore the discomfort. It was at that moment that a terrifying scream echoed throughout the entire cemetery. The scream was full of despair and anguish, and its chilling sound made me jump back in fright. I looked around once more, but everyone seemed to go on with their lives, as if nothing had happened. That scream carried such intensity and deep suffering that it became indelibly etched in my memory. Even months later, the memory still haunts me. It was a truly enigmatic and inexplicable episode which has left me with a feeling of unease to this day. Was it some kind of supernatural manifestation or just a mere product of my imagination? All I know is that it was extremely bizarre. Hi Leo, I'm Donato from Belo Horizonte. Please draw me in a Ben 10 shirt if you choose this story. The bizarre story I'm going to tell here today happened to me in 2020 and ended at the end of that year. My Aunt Irene hurt her leg in an unusual accident while she was cleaning the backyard. It was a tiled floor and by accident she slipped and fell badly, man, fracturing the bone in her leg. She went to the emergency room, got her leg treated, and after a while came back home. It was at that moment that she got infected by the disease. I spent a few days helping her at home.
And then we realized that she wasn't doing well.
She needed to be hospitalized because she was short of breath. She was in pretty bad shape in a serious condition. Actually, it broke our hearts. It's sad to see a relative in that condition, man. Since we lived in a rural area, it was hard to go to that hospital every day. So one day my mom decided to go there to see how she was doing. We went with masks to avoid a possible infection, and when we got there, she wasn't getting any better. On the contrary, her condition was getting more and more critical. I was really scared, thinking we were going to catch this bizarre disease and end up like my aunt. So we went back to our house and decided to burn the couch she used to sit on because it could have the virus. And we could catch it, right? My dad lent me a lighter so I could set it on fire. However, when I started to set the object on fire, something strange happened. When the couch started to burn, a ghostly figure made of fire appeared before my eyes. It looked like a creature screaming and thrashing about. Desperate, I ran to my father for help, and when we came back, he didn't see anything unusual. He told me it must have just been the force of the fire-consuming material, making me think it was something like that. At the end of that same year, unfortunately, Eerie left us. And to this day, I don't know what that apparition of fire was. Could it have been just a normal fire or something more sinister? A manifestation of the disease that caused all this harm, and that was embedded in the couch. I don't know what happened, right? A hug, Leo. Thank you very much for everything. My name is Sabrina. I'm 15 years old, and recently my family moved to a new house. My father got an amazing deal, buying a piece of land farther from the city center for a very low price. It was a quiet place surrounded by dense forest. The problem was that right after we moved in, we started hearing scary stories about a mysterious neighbor who lived about 2 kilometers away. The stories said that this neighbor had a huge and scary dog that ate anything that moved. And after we started living there, we had 3 cats and 5 dogs go missing, all possibly victims of this monstrous dog. People there would say that it was huge and fierce, with eyes that glowed in the dark. My father got worried about our safety, so he decided to go to that woman's house to complain, and he hoped to find a solution for that. So man, one afternoon my father and I went to the house of that mysterious neighbor, the one everyone talked about. The place was completely isolated, surrounded by trees and bushes, making it hard to see the house. When we finally got to the door, my breath caught in my throat. The house looked abandoned and run down with broken windows and peeling paint. My father knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He tried the doorknob and it turned easily. We entered the house carefully, afraid of what we might find inside. Everything was shrouded in darkness and the air was heavy with a tense atmosphere. It seemed like no one had lived there for years. We walked through the hallways with the sound of our footsteps echoing through the abandoned house. When we got to what seemed to be the living room, it was very hard to breathe. There was a large portrait on the wall showing a woman with empty eyes and a sinister smile. It was possibly the mysterious neighbor. We kept exploring the house, each step increasing the feeling of unease. We reached a room that seemed to be the place where the woman lived. It was filled with old books and old portraits.
But the creepiest thing was when we noticed a dog collar on the floor.
with a name engraved on it, Rex. That was the name of the feared killer dog who used to eat the neighborhood dogs and cats. At that moment, we heard a sound coming from outside. We ran to the window and saw something that made our blood run cold. The gigantic dog Rex was standing in the yard, staring at the house. His eyes were shining and his drool was dripping. That wasn't a normal dog, Leo. It was a demonic beast. With his heart racing, my father said that the mysterious neighbor probably shouldn't be there. Actually, that creature must have eaten her. There were blood stains on the floor. Probably the lady was his last meal. The dog suddenly broke down the door and came in furious. Luckily, my father was carrying his pistol and fired at the animal. Luckily, it ran away from there and we were able to go back home. Even today, I'm afraid to walk down the street, scared that this bizarre dog might show up. If I hadn't seen that gigantic monster myself, I wouldn't believe that such a scary creature exists. My name is Jonas, and I want to share a strange story that happened to me when I was about 10 years old. Fred was a mutt, friendly and loyal that I had since I was very little. He was my constant companion, and we had many adventures together. Until one day, sadness knocked on our door. Fred got sick, and despite all our efforts, we couldn't save him. He passed away, leaving a huge void in my heart. I remember it like it was today. I went to the backyard of our house, where he used to play and lie in the sun. And with tears in my eyes, I dug a grave to bury him. I placed a small tombstone in his honor and cried all night long. That was one of the hardest nights of my life. That same night, it was around midnight, and I was lying in bed still shaken by the loss of Fred. When I heard a strange sound coming from the backyard, it was an unsettling sound, like a constant scratching that couldn't be ignored. I got up and went over to the window, to take a look, see what was causing that noise. But nothing was in sight. Everything seemed normal. Still disturbed, I went to bed and tried to sleep, convincing myself that my imagination was running wild. The next day, however, I went to Fred's tombstone to pay my respects again, and something seemed wrong. The soil of the grave was sinking, forming a small depression. Perplexed, I grabbed a shovel and started digging to find out what was happening there. To my surprise and horror, when the earth started to move, I realized that Fred's body was no longer there. He had simply disappeared. Intrigued and scared, I asked my father if he had done something with Fred's body, if he had moved it somewhere else to be buried. But he vehemently denied it, assuring me that he hadn't touched the dog's grave. He attributed the strange event to the natural movements of the earth underground, trying to find a logical explanation for Fred's body's disappearance. But I still wasn't convinced of that. The memory of the strange sound from the previous night kept tormenting my mind. A few years went by. My grandmother had a pet kitten that passed away, and I decided to bury it a little farther from the house, far from Fred's grave. However, to my surprise and horror, the same thing happened again. The ground gave way and the kitten's body disappeared. This left a disturbing suspicion. Some creature or unknown force was stealing the bodies of the animals that were buried there. That was terrifying and inexplicable. I wondered if the strange sound I heard years ago was related to this mystery, but I had no clear answers.
And my friends, we're almost reaching 1,500,000 subscribers.
Man, if you watch the channel and you're not subscribed yet, I invite you to join Leo Augusto's team of subscribers. I just had my birthday this week, man, so give me this gift, bro. Subscribe to the channel, man. It's free. Oh, and don't forget to comment down below too. I will be reading and replying to all the comments, alright? A big hug and enjoy the rest of the video. Hello Leo, how are you? My name is Wellington. I'm 14 years old and I'm going to tell my story. It all started when I was 12. It was starting to get dark and I was going to a pond a bit far from my house because it was very hot that night. I was going with my 3 friends. We were very excited, catching up, really relaxed. When we got to the pond, I felt something strange and I also saw something weird. It looked like a woman in white in the middle of the water, but I stayed calm. Maybe it was just my imagination, right? Me and my friends. So we went into the water and everything was fine. The night was calm with the starry sky shining over the lagoon. But then, when I least expected it, I saw the woman in white again. Her figure appeared in front of me. It looked like she was standing on the water, just a step away from me. Her eyes were a well of darkness. Her flowing hair was as white as the moon, and her skin looked pale and cold like marble. She then placed her foot on my head and pushed down. At that moment, I started swallowing water and drowning. I couldn't free myself from that terrifying situation, and I don't remember anything after that. I only remember being woken up by my friends at the edge of the lake, coughing a lot and expelling water. My friends told me that they just saw me drowning out of nowhere. And the strangest thing about all of this was that where we were, the water wasn't even deep. It wasn't that deep, not enough for me to drown. They just said that the scene suddenly changed and that dark clouds formed quickly. There was also lightning approaching, tearing through the sky and deafening thunder. But they didn't see any woman there, much less me drowning, as I reported. At first they thought I was joking, but after they saw that I wasn't coming up from under the water, that's when they pulled me up. An old resident there named Mr. Pereira used to walk around the lagoon at night. He was passing by and saw the commotion, right? And he asked if everything was okay. And then he told something creepy. According to him, the lagoon was a place cursed for generations. That people drowned there in mysterious ways, even at the edge where it was shallow. And that he tried to find answers, but he never found any. Since the encounter with the woman in white, I've been tormented by terrible nightmares. I'm always being drowned by her. Going to a dark place and I wake up with the sheet over my face, suffocating me, soaked in cold sweat, convinced these would be my last moments alive. I hope you guys enjoyed this bizarre story from the subscribers. And if you want to send a story to appear in this segment here, just send it to this email right here, inscritosliogmail.com. Alright, I'm going to wrap it up here. Bye.